Recording in.
Good evening and welcome to the fourth and final class of this course, Outsmarting Antisemitism. Like we always say, it's always bittersweet when we have to give the last class of a course. Generally, we give a 6-week or class course, but this time we are doing only a 4-part series. So tonight will be the last of this series. But stay tuned. There are many more series, being planned. There'll be a standalone class or program on Jewish melodies, a very interesting program in January, and as well as our next JLI course, a 6-week course titled Meditations. 6 very powerful meditations in Judaism, which will begin towards the end of January. We have to begin with thanking our sponsor. So we'll have to thank Lakeside, let me get it up here, Lake Lawn Metairie Funeral Home and Cemeteries, a dignity memorial provider. Thank you for your sponsorship, for your support for this course and for many Chabad programs. We greatly appreciate your support and partnership. Thank you to Billy and Stephen and all of the staff of Lake Lawn Metairie. We also have to thank another sponsor, Angela Gordon, who is sponsoring tonight's dinner. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you.
Right. There's nothing like sitting down to dinner and relaxing together with friends. Thank you, Angela. We appreciate it. Okay, and welcome to those who are with us on Zoom, Amy and Stephen, and all those who have joined recently over here as well, Jen and everyone else. Okay, so tonight's discussion, we're going to discuss another element of anti-Semitism, and it's difficult. It's a big problem that we have within our society, and that is, in addition to people who are haters, have hatred within them, what do we do, and how do we deal with hatred in the public arena? Which means when there are people of influence, people in power, in leadership positions, in commerce, in media, in politics, who take, is that my phone? Who take a position which can potentially harm the Jewish people. Now, we're not talking about people who are openly anti-Semitic. We're not talking about people who are openly and publicly saying, and perhaps even proud of it, that we do not like Jewish people. And those people, we have to deal with it in a different way. The Hamans and the Hitler of our generation, that's a whole different discussion. What we're going to be talking today are people who, if you ask them, they would say, of course, I love the Jewish people. I have Jewish friends. I have Jewish family. I'm a philo-Semite. I'm a lover of the Jewish people, a lover of Israel. But at the same time, their behavior seems to go against that. They are acting or doing things or saying things that could be going against the Jewish people. So it could be a journalist who portrays Jews negatively. It could be a government official who is soft in responding to a local anti-Semitic incident. It could be an actor who boycotts Israel. It could be an academic who condones anti-Semitic rhetoric, a university president who doesn't act swiftly to ensure that Jewish students feel safe on campus. There are so many areas where we feel like if this person was a true lover of Israel, they would do something differently. They would act quickly. They would make a statement. They will help out. And they're not. And we're not here to label people as an anti-Semite, but the point is sometimes we know that it is coming from a place because they do not have that love to the Jewish people. There is that stereotype and there is that stigma, and maybe maybe we should call them out. And that's really what we're going to discuss tonight. How do we deal with these people? Whether it is in journalism, in entertainment, in politics, in academia, once we deem that these people are, quote unquote, against us, what do we do about it? So in politics, we know what we do. We rent a bulldozer and we run them over. We destroy them. Okay. But what do we do as a Jewish community? What's the right response? What's a healthy response? And like everything, we're here to study Torah. So what does the Torah have to tell us about how to deal with certain people in a influential position and leadership position, which many times their rhetoric or their statements could shape directly or indirectly the attitudes and policies that can have an impact on the Jewish people. So what do we do about it? So let's start with a case study. So perhaps some of you remember going back to the 1950s, the 1960s, where France was the primary supplier of Israeli weapons. Not the US and not any other country. France was really the sole country that Israel heavily relied on for weaponry supply. So what happens? In 1967 was the 6-Day War in Israel. Just for those perhaps who are not familiar, the 6-Day War was, how long did it take? How long did it last? 6 days.
Supposed to last 6 days, but it stayed until 8 days.
It was supposed to last one day and lasted 6 days. Okay.
Well, since there was never a formal, there probably wasn't a formal.
We're still officially fighting in Syria.
There was-
Okay, so 1967, summer 1967. All Israeli neighbors, every single country neighboring Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt, were attacking Israel. And they were clearly announcing, proclaiming, we are going to annihilate the Jewish people from sea to sea. Palestine will be free, right? Now, Israel purchases 50 Mirage fighters from France. Extremely, extremely important for Israel to have these fighters. France, trying to be neutral over here, France says, okay, we're going to place an embargo against the sale of military equipment to all sides of the fights. So for Israel, this is equal. We're not taking sides over here. For the Arab nations and for Israel equally. Now everyone knew at the time that this was only hurting Israel because the Soviet Union was supplying the Arab countries with all the supplies that they need. It was only Israel that had no other source of supply. So it was only hurting Israel. Now we also know that for France, it was a decision that they made because up until 1962, they were occupying Algeria, so therefore they weren't really able to have a good relationship with the Arab world. But now that they left Algeria, so now they're trying to build that relationship with the Arab world. So they felt that this would be a good move on their behalf. But Israel was suffering. Okay. Now to make things worse, 3 years later, 1970, we are in the midst of the war of attrition. Are you familiar with that? And that was basically a 2-year war, 1969, 1970, where Egypt was basically attacking, ongoing attacks for 2 years almost. The Israeli troops that were stationed in the Sinai Desert. And this is going on back and forth for about 2 years. Lots of tension going on. Israel was basically in a war for all this time. During this time, France announces that they are going to sell Libya, who was a hostile country to Israel, 50 Mirage fighters. Now, it actually ended up being 110, but originally they said 50. So let's look at a article in the New York Times from January 1970 in text 1, lesson 4, page 116. After much hesitation, French officials acknowledged tonight that about 50 Mirage jet fighters planes were to be sold to Libya. The confirmation of the sale was expected to provoke sharp protests from Israel. The Israelis suspect that the planes will sooner or later find their way to the fighting fronts. The French defense minister reaffirmed the French embargo policy of selling no arms to the countries directly in conflict. Israel, the United Arab Republic, which was what Egypt was called then, Jordan and Syria, and said that they were convinced that Libya sought to supply her own forces. Israeli fears of the Libyan mirages is based on a conviction shared by some French experts that the Libyan Air Force and in its present state could not absorb such numbers of a highly advanced plane. I mean, everyone knew that Libya does not need these 50 planes or 100 planes. The fear is compounded by the aggressive stance taken toward Israel by the new revolutionary military regime, which has been in power in Libya since early September. The plane sold to Libya is believed to be the Mirage 3, which the same type of the 50 built for Israel, but placed under embargo in 1967. The Israelis are expected to find particularly galling the fact that they have been denied about the same number of planes now made available to the hostile Arab country. They all knew that this is just a way to funnel these planes to the front lines. Either Egypt or Syria or Jordan will get their hands on these planes. Okay, so this is what's happening in 1970. Okay, and if you remember it, no. Okay, now what is the Jewish response? Now we're not talking about the Israeli response as a country. Jewish people. President de Gaulle of France, an anti-Semite. What's he doing over here? He's undermining Israel. What do we do? How do we go about this? And this was a real question because a few weeks later, in February 1970, President de Gaulle, President de Gaulle was in 1967. He was the one who placed the embargo. This is already Pompidou, the next president of France. He was the one who sold the fighters to Libya. Now he's coming on a state visit to United States, to New York, to Washington. He spent there 8 days. The American Jewish community, what do? Do we protest? Do we meet with him? Do we boycott it? What's our response? What will you say? You're at this meeting. Pompidou is coming to Washington. What are we doing? As a Jewish community, what are we doing? Anything?
Bringing the bulldozers.
Bringing the bulldozers. Okay. Peaceful demonstrations. Okay.
Smart thing would be to see if you could get a representative to meet with him.
So maybe have a meeting with him and do what with him? He's a hater. Is he a hater?
Yes, no.
Yes and no. Eric's saying we're not sure exactly what's going on over here. Yeah. Okay, so there are many different responses. We're going to get back to what actually happened and was it effective or not. But before we go there, let's first look at the precedent. How have the Jewish people throughout history responded in similar circumstances? And as Jews, we start all the way back to the Torah. So what we're going to do now is we are going to look at a story, an incident, an episode of the Torah, how it was dealt in biblical times, and we'll go through history, how it was dealt in the Romans, times of the Romans, Spanish Inquisition, and then we'll get back to the story of Pompidou, and also how do we deal with this in modern times in contemporary issues. So obviously, many different responses, many different ways to go about it. We're not saying one is right, one is wrong, but it's always important to also have to throw into the mix the general attitude that the Torah tells us how to deal with these situations. So let's start with the story in the Torah, which is actually this week's Torah portion, the Parsha of the week, which deals with the story of Jacob and his brother Esau. Yaakov and Esau, Jacob and Esau. So let's set the stage. What's happening over here? Jacob,
35 years.
oh, he's away for 35 years, exactly. Why is he away for 35 years? Because he stole the blessings. Esav is mad. We're not going to get into now whether it was justifiable or not. We're taking the approach that what Jacob did was not wrong. And that is the Jewish approach, but that's a discussion for itself. Esav is extremely mad at him. He wants to murder him, wants to kill him. Yaakov leaves Egypt, leaves Israel, and he's away for 35 years or 22 years outside of Israel. He spent also many years in the yeshiva. Now he comes back. He has accumulated a mass wealth. He has a family, and he has many servants. He has a lot of cattle. He's very wealthy. He was extremely successful. Now he wants to know what's happening with my brother Esau. It's been so long. I haven't seen him so many years. Should we make a family reunion? What's going on? Does he have any children? A bar mitzvah, a wedding, a bris, something, right? What's going on? Let's check in with each other. So he sends messengers to find out. Tell me what's going on with Esau. They come back and they relate. Oh, your brother, he's the same Esau. He's the same wicked person who still wants to kill you. And in fact, he's heading towards you. And he's angry. There's blood in his eyes. And he has an army of 400 men. And some commentators say that it was 400 like captains or generals. He had thousands of men coming, marching towards Jacob to fight Jacob.
The generals don't usually fight, so that's
Okay, so that Jacob was calm down. Oh, it's only generals. Jacob is a small family, 20 people. He is no match to the mighty Esau, who is equipped, who is trained. He's been doing this for years. What does Jacob do? Before he hugs him, how does he prepare? Spoiler alert. But how did he prepare to this encounter with Esau? He did three things. He sent gifts. Let's read this inside. We don't have to guess. We read this in text 2. 3 steps. Jacob prepared himself for a 3-pronged response: a prayer, a gift, and armed struggle. So he prepared for 3 things. It's important to analyze each of these 3 things that he did, and also the order that he has done it. It's also important. What did he do first? What was second? And what was left for last? The first thing he does is he prays. Oh, of course he prayed. No, it's not of course he prayed. If you remember, in lesson 1, we discussed the importance of reaching to the source of our security, God. We spoke about the cliche, God helps those who help themselves, and we said it's not exactly accurate. We believe God helps those who make it they make it appear as if they're helping themselves. So ultimately, whatever we do, it could work or it could fail. It only works because God wants it to work. So it's God's blessing, which is confined, which is concealed in the action that we do. So when going to war, we know it's not the fighting that helps us, it's God blessing through the fighting. We leave that, making that space for God's blessing. So Yaakov recognizes this. So Yaakov says, the first thing I got to do, I got to pray. And you look in the Torah, a beautiful prayer. God, promise me you'll be with me. A few verses of Jacob's prayer. That's point number 1. But that already we discussed previously. So let's focus on 2 and 3. The second thing he does is a gift, diplomacy. Let's work something out. He sends a gift, but not just a random generic gift. You ever get that gift in the mail where it's just like, all right? Or you think of a gift, a very personalized gift, something that you like and you know, like you studied the person, you know, this is something that you appreciate. This is what Jacob did. He had a lot of cattle, but he knew that in order to win him over, he has to work. He has to appeal to Esau's emotions. So he didn't just send the gift. He sent 1 gift, some cattle. And then a quarter mile later, another gift. Quarter mile later, another gift, right? So the emotions were building up. You know, you get a very large gift. You get 10 gifts at once, or he could get 10 gifts over an hour, every few minutes, or every few a new gift. So the same 10 gifts has so much more of an effect. Parenthetically, a few weeks ago, I was away for a Shabbos. My entire family were, there were 12 in the family. So all of us, besides for one who was in Israel, surprised my mother for her birthday in Toronto. So we all flew up there, got there Thursday night or Friday. And the idea was we were going to surprise her. We're going to show up at a door on Friday afternoon. Hey, we're here for Shabbos, your whole family. So I have a few siblings who live in Toronto, but it was everyone else who flew in from out of town came to surprise. So we had this little discussion. How are we going to surprise her, right? Exciting. So one idea was, let's all just show up to the door, ring the bell, and knock on the door. Hey, we're all here. Wow, the whole family's here. What a surprise. And then we came up with the idea, let's do what Jacob did, where let's do this slowly. So my oldest sister, she rings the bell. They open up. Wow, you're here. It's amazing. What a surprise. I'm so happy you came. 20 seconds later, the next sibling. 20 seconds later, the next sibling. So we have this all on video. It's very exciting. My kids love to watch it. And just that, to build up all those emotions. So that's exactly what Jacob did with Esau. So he was working, he was methodical. He thought it through. How could he appease? How could he win him over emotionally? That's A. B, if you look at the wording, he sent a message with these messengers. Tell my brother that your servant Jacob, he uses the word servant. He is a servant to Esau. Esau, a wicked man. Jacob, the king of the world, a successful businessman. I am your servant. Who cares? This is what he said. He wanted to appease to him. He wanted to work with him. That's what he did. And only after that, the third and last thing that he prepared was war. If push comes to shove, I have to fight, I'm going to fight. And with God's help, I'll be successful. But that's the last resort. He didn't start with a war. He started with gifts. And some may ask, is that not beneath him? Is that not inferior? Is that not a weakness that Jacob was showing? I need to bow to my brother, a wicked brother. I need to call myself a servant. I need to send him gifts. Who is this guy? Who do you think he is? Let me fight him. And let me kill it, right? But no. Jacob knew, through his prayer, obviously, that this is what God wants him to do. God is protecting Jacob, and God wants that his protection should come through, it should be manifest through diplomacy with his brother Esau. So it wasn't out of a weakness, he was proud. And as a proud person, as a proud brother, he says, this is what I have to do. This is the circumstance, this is the situation, this is where I was put in. Now I'll make the best of it. Was he successful? Was he successful? What happened? What did Esau do? Did Esau kill Jacob? No. What did he do? He hugged and they cried, but before he cried, they hugged and they kissed. Like a brotherly hug, beautiful, right? Now, we'll talk about this kiss. Because in the Torah, when they write the word, and he kissed him, which is the word of Vayishokehu, and he kissed him. So there's a few dots that we write on top of the word. And you find this a few times in the Torah, and whenever there are these dots on the word, it comes to minimize the meaning of the word. So when it says, and he kissed him, there's dots. What does that mean? Wait, he didn't really kiss him? He made as if he kissed him? Let's look at text number 3. Esau ran toward Jacob and embraced him. He fell on Jacob's neck and kissed him, and they wept. Go straight to text 4. The Torah features dots over the words, and he kissed him. This is because Esau did not kiss Jacob wholeheartedly. What does the Talmud tell us? Oh, he kissed him. It was a very superficial type of kiss. It wasn't wholeheartedly. He didn't really mean it. He went through the motions. Doesn't say the air kiss. Doesn't say the air kiss. In fact, it says, interesting, Midrash said that he actually was trying to bite his neck, and it didn't work because miraculously his neck turned hard like a stone. But the point is, he went through the motions. He kissed him. The text continues. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, and take note of this name, because we'll get back to this name. He says as follows: it is an established fact that Esau hates Jacob. Nevertheless, his compassion was moved at that time, and he kissed him wholeheartedly. So what does Rabbi Shimon tell us? That don't be fooled that suddenly Esau became a lover of Israel. It's a known fact, it's an established fact that before and after, Esau does not like Jacob. Nevertheless, at that moment, it was genuine. At that moment, there was not feigned. At that moment, there was a real, genuine kiss. Now, the moment later, what happened? They weren't in good terms. First, Esau offers some of his men, hey, Jacob, maybe I could give you some of my men to escort you. And Jacob says, thank you, but no thank you. I appreciate it. We're walking slowly. We have young children. That's fine. And they part ways. When's the next time they meet? So their father Isaac dies, and they bury him together, but we don't know much about what happened then. Did they get along? Were they on talking terms? We don't know. Maybe they were. Hopefully they were. But we do have an interesting incident. Years later, after Jacob dies, you know the story that the Talmud tells us? Not in the scripture, but the Talmud tells us that Jacob dies in Egypt. He has his children promise him that they will bring him up to Israel, to Hebron, to the cave of the Machpelah in Hebron to be buried. There are 7 spots, 7 burial plots in this cave. Adam and Eve, that's 2. Abraham and Sarah is 4. Isaac and Rebekah is 6. Leah was buried there at 7. There's 1 spot left. Jacob was going to be buried near his wife in the Machpelah. So they bring him up, the whole entourage, and they're about to proceed. They're about to start. The rabbi's by the mic. He's about to start the ceremony. And who shows up? Uncle Esau is there. What's going on over here? Oh, my brother died. Where are you burying him? We're burying him over here. Ooh, it's my spot. I'm the firstborn. The firstborn gets the last spot. What is this? You say, wait, you're the firstborn. You don't remember, uncle? Your memory is failing you? You don't remember you sold your birthright? Esau says, really? Prove it. They say, listen, we actually have a document. We have a paper, a signed document, but it's in Egypt. Esau says, you're not burying him until you show me the document. So they had no choice. So they send Naphtali, one of the children of Jacob, who was swift like a deer. He was able to run to Egypt while everyone's waiting. Everyone's waiting around. Hey, where's Naphtali? How long is it going to take? Meanwhile, one of Jacob's grandchildren, Hushim, his name was, he was kind of, deaf, wasn't really able to hear, but he sees a commotion. He asks his uncles or his father, what's going on over here? They said, look, your great uncle Esau is making problems. He says, really? He's going to make an issue with my grandfather should be disrespected like this before his death. And he went and he killed his great uncle Esau. That is the way Esau passed away. It's the story of the Talmud. The point is, why am I telling you this? It's an interesting story. But we see that till the last day, Esau wasn't a friend. He was willing to have Jacob lay there. We know in Judaism how important it is to bury our dead right away. Disrespectful to wait, especially just sitting over there for how long it takes, a few days to run from Israel back to Egypt. But he wasn't a friend. The point is that at that moment, either it was a genuine kiss or it was a feigned kiss, but it was a kiss, which means Jacob was successful. Why was he successful? What was his goal? His goal was to get through this encounter, to live, to be able to have this encounter and not die. Esau wanted to kill him. He was successful. Whether he changed him internally, whether he transformed him from a hater to a lover, not necessarily. But he was successful in saving lives. Diplomacy worked. Even if it was only fake, it was a faked kiss. Who cares? Who cares? It was done. You know the story of a small town who gets the visit from a mayor who was up for re-elections. So he comes to the town, comes to the small city hall. It's a small town, a few hundred residents. And he asks the people in the town, so how could I help you? What do you need? So he said, oh, we have two problems in this town. Problem number one is we don't have a local doctor. Hold it, give me a minute, makes a phone call. Yeah, you're able to come. Okay, thank you. We took care of it. What's your next problem? Our next problem is that we don't have any cell phone service here. So
I was in New Orleans.
you know the guy. Was he reelected? No. So the point is, sometimes it's an empty promise, but sometimes it's a promise that we do even though we don't feel it, but it's done. And the main thing is we need our elected officials, we need our people in influence to speak positively, whether they mean it or not. The point is at least let them have that influence, that positive influence. So that's why we consider this a resounding success. Now, so this is a story in the Torah. It's a biblical story. Nachmanides writes that this story is so important. Everything in the Torah is a lesson for us, and especially this story, this incident of the way Jacob dealt with Esau is the way Jewish communities throughout the generations have to learn how to deal with their local officials. I want to read this in text 5. And the Nachmanides quotes a midrash that talks about a great sage, a great rabbi by the name of Rabbi Yanai, who lived during the 3rd century under the Roman Empire. The midrash relates that when Rabbi Yanai would set out for a meeting with the Roman government, he would first read this passage in the Torah regarding Jacob and Esau. The sages had a tradition that this passage was a guide for our exile. Therefore, when Rabbi Yanai would visit the rulers of Rome for communal issues, he would consult this passage to follow the advice of the wise Jacob. It is indeed appropriate for all generations to study his approach and to adopt it in actual practice. So this is what Nachmanides tells us. We have to avoid antagonizing non-Jews, but we should find effective ways to influence them, even if it means by showering Jew haters with kind words, bestowing them lavish gifts, like Jacob did to Esau. It wasn't comfortable. That's what you have to do. That's what works for the community. This is what we are supposed to do. Let's move on in history a little bit. So we have what we quoted earlier, Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai had a very interesting life. He lived in time of the Romans, and he had a history with the Romans. He, at one point, made a comment about the Roman Empire or the Roman government, how all that they do is always motivated by self-interest. The bathhouse and the bridges and the roads and the marketplaces, everything that they do, all the infrastructure that they build, it's all for themselves. That was the comment he made. The Romans heard about it. They wanted to execute him. They wanted to kill him. He had to go in hiding. For 13 years, Rabbi Shimon and his son Elazar was in a cave. They were hiding in the northern Israel in a cave. The same Rabbi Shimon we quoted earlier, he's the one that says it's an established fact that Esau hates Jacob. He probably wasn't only talking about Esau and Jacob in biblical times, but he was also probably talking about the Romans that he was living in contemporary Esau. You know, the Romans were from the Edomites, or the Edomites, and they were descendants from Esau. So the Edomites, the Romans hate the Jewish people, they're haters. Nevertheless, we find something very interesting. At one point, there was a decree that the Romans put forth against some Jewish rituals, namely Shabbat, circumcision, and family purity. Look at text 6, the second paragraph. The Jews said to themselves, who should go to Rome to solicit annulment of the decree? Let Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai go, for he is experienced in miracles. Parenthetically, before they sent Rabbi Shimon, they sent a man by the name of Rabbi Reuven. This Reuven disguised himself as a Roman, and he came to the emperor and he says, "What's your issue? You don't want, you hate the Jews, you don't like the Jews. You know, circumcision makes a person's body stronger or weaker. Oh, it makes them weaker. So allow them to circumcise themselves. If you don't work on Shabbat, are you going to make more money or less money? You're going to make less money. Let the Jewish people take off Shabbat. You don't want the Jewish people to prosper. You don't want them to have large families. Family purity, it limits the time that a husband and wife can live together. Let them keep family purity." And he says, "You know what? You're right." So he annulled his decree. Later, he found out that this Reuven, disguised as a Roman, was really Jewish, so he put the decrees back on. So now they're stuck. So now what do they say? Rabbi Shimon. Who did they send? Think about this. The same rabbi, the same person who was persecuted personally. For 13 years, he was in hiding from the Romans. He was the one who taught us earlier that it's an established fact that the Romans hate the Jewish people, that Esau hates Jacob. Nevertheless, he was chosen and he accepted the position. He went to Rome to advocate, to lobby on behalf of the Jewish people. What does this come to show? That he believed that, yes, we could say the haters will hate, but we still have to work with them. But ultimately, we are goal-oriented. We want to have we want to minimize the decrees. We want to take away the decrees. We want to help out in certain areas. We may not transform them to lovers, but we have to work with them. And this model continued to be followed throughout most of Jewish history. In Europe, there was an influential court Jew. In Hebrew, they called them shtadlanim. Shtadlan, lihishtadel. So what does lihishtadel mean? I am trying. I'm putting in effort. A shtadlan was a person who was working on behalf, trying to help the Jewish community. Many times, they would call them the court Jews. Many times, these were people that already had some type of position in the palace. They were a financial advisor. They were working somehow, a doctor in Spain. Maimonides famously was a doctor, and Nachmanides and others. And while they were there, they tried to use their influence on behalf of the Jewish people. Many of these court Jews were successful. Many of them weren't. But if you look in figure 4.1 on page 123, we see a number, it's just an example of, we just choose 6 famous court Jews, where they were, when they lived, and they were successful in their work. Working with people who are extremely hostile to the Jewish people. Nevertheless, if you work with them, you may achieve something on behalf of the Jewish people. One of these people, more of a famous one, his name was Rabbi Yosef Roshan. He lived from 1480 to 1554. And he was advocating on behalf of the German Jews in the court of the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I, and later his grandson Charles V. Charles V was also a grandchild of Ferdinand and Isabella. Was he a Jew hater? Probably, right? He presided over the Spanish Inquisition. He was the king of Spain. Charles V. Nevertheless, Rabbi Yosef Roshan worked with him and was successful. Look at text number 7. This is a diary that Rabbi Yosef himself wrote about all his work in the palace. In 1531, the denouncers once again hounded the Emperor Charles V while he was in Belgium and Holland, lands uninhabited by Jews. He doesn't give us the details exactly what was the issue, but obviously something against the Jewish people. Many requested that I travel to those lands to oppose their accusers. With the help of God, I was at the court of the exalted emperor for 4 months, from the 1st of Adar until the 1st of Sivan, pursuing the interests of the Jewish communities. Although Rothroy attempted to swallow me alive and to bring about my demise. I'm not sure who this person is, but obviously some type of person some officer or someone that really was making trouble for this rabbi. God in his great mercy sent his messenger and saved me from his hands and from all those who sought to harm me. At that time, here's the key. I had an audience with the emperor in his private chamber. I spoke to him for as long as I needed, and he responded sympathetically. During this period, when I had free time and was secluded in my room, I authored a book entitled The Sanctified Path. So we see he's a rabbi. He's writing books. He's studying Torah. At the same time, he really believed as a rabbi, nothing beneath him. It's not a weakness. But this is what we have to do. Work even with the people who we feel we are labeling in our heads as Jew haters. We have to work with them. And here he was able to accomplish, it doesn't say exactly what it was, but he was able to accomplish something through his all his efforts and advocacy that he has done with Charles V. Again, we are very much goal-oriented. Now, we weren't always successful. If you look at page 126, we see a famous painting that is in the Prado Museum in Madrid, where this is the painting that is during the time of the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492. When Ferdinand and Isabella decreed the expulsion of all the Jews from Spain, the court Jew who was around them was a man, a great rabbi, who wrote a commentator on the Torah as well. His name was Don Isaac Abarbanel. He was a wealthy Jewish scholar, and he had 3 separate audiences with the king, tried to annul this decree. We should not expel the Jewish people. And at one point he felt, maybe he has a listening ear, it might be successful. And at that moment, someone ran in to the room, and this is what the painting is trying to portray. And at that moment, there was a chief inquisitor burst into the room and threw the cross on the floor and said, he yelled, "Judas sold him for 30 pieces of silver. Now you want to sell them again." And that itself kind of ruined all his efforts. So he wasn't successful. I think at the end, they offered him that he could stay with a minion of Jews. And Rabbi says, no, if you're expelling the Jewish people, I'm part of the nation, I'm leaving with them. But the point is, we weren't always successful. So this basically sums up the general typical response that the Jewish people had throughout the ages, learning from Jacob and Esau. And this is what we did. We did not label people as haters. We tried to work with them. We don't try to ignore them. We also understand that ultimately God's blessing is involved over here. God's blessing is really what's making it happen, and we got to do our part. So we didn't feel a weakness. We didn't feel inferior. We felt pride. As Jewish people, this is what God wants us to do. And often we were successful. Often we weren't. Now again, we're not talking about people who are openly anti-Semites, people who are the Hamans and the Hitlers of the generation. That's a whole different discussion. We're talking about people who, if you talk to them, they're willing to talk to you. They're willing to negotiate. But we just know that what's going on within them, they have hatred. So how do we deal with them? This is the way we dealt with them. Now, before we get to modern times, do you have any questions or comments before we go further? Before we get to contemporary time, and we still got to get back to the story of Pompidou in France, 1970. We'll get back to that. So, what's going on over here? So, are these people haters or are they not haters? Right? Sometimes we seem to think that black and white. Charles V, was he a hater? He was presiding over the Spanish Inquisition, persecuting Jews. He allowed it. He must be a hater.
Whether he's a hater or not, it's also possible he was simply unwilling to, he was responding to pressures from a certain direction too.
So saying he was also a politician.
I'm saying he was.
So in politics, we know that a lot goes into any decision that's made. What's popular, what's going to get me the votes, right? There's a lot that goes in, but it's not only in politicians. There'll be other people in leadership, in academia, and journalists, right? And sometimes we feel like they're 90% of the time seem to be neutral, and then every once in a while they come out with a statement or something that they do. It seems to be going totally like a real hater of the Jewish people. Well, are they a hater or they're not a hater? So there was a book written by David Eagleman, who spoke about the incident in 2006, I believe, with Mel Gibson. You remember the story with Mel Gibson when he was drunk?
Yeah.
He came back from a party, I think it was, and he was speeding and driving. He was under the influence of alcohol, and he was arrested actually by a Jewish policeman, a Jewish cop, and he starts cursing out the Jewish people. Jewish people, all the wars in the world, all caused by the Jewish people, goes on and on and on. The next day, he's sober, he apologizes, it's not who I am, I'm not a Jew hater. Many of his Jewish friends come out and say, we know him for so many years, he's a lover of the Jewish people, it wasn't him talking, da, 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 da. So, well, was it only, sometimes we say, well, under the influence, you have a loose tongue and you speak what you're really thinking, right? Like nichnas yain, the wine goes in and the secrets come out, right? So this must be a secret that deep down, this is something. On the other hand, it seems to be, many people say, what do you mean? He's not really a Jew hater. So should we label him Jew hater? Should we not?
Passion of Christ as well.
Yep.
So I'm looking to see what year that was.
Okay, so we're actually not going to go through all of his statements because there's actually articles.
Relative to that incident.
No, yeah. There are articles. It wasn't the only time he said something similar. He said other things, but we're not. But this is just like an example of someone who said something, but is that really who they are? Does that label them? Does that define them? So let's read text 8A and text 8B. Talking from neuroscience, cognitive diversity. Could there be diversity in our minds, or is it all one-sided? Brains are like representative democracies. This is an interesting analogy. They are built of multiple overlapping experts who weigh in and compete over different choices. There's an ongoing conversation among the different factions in your brain, each competing to control the single output channel of your behavior. When the hostess at a party offers chocolate cake, you find yourself on the horns of a dilemma. Some parts of your brain have evolved to crave the rich energy source of the sugar, and other parts care about the negative consequences, such as the health of your heart. Part of you wants the cake, and part of you tries to muster the fortitude to forgo it. So what do?
I give in.
You eat the cake, of course, right? The final vote of the parliament determines which party controls your action. That is, whether you put your hand up or out. As the French essayist Michel de Montaigne once put it, there is as much difference between us and ourselves as there is between us and others. There's this war going on in our minds, in our brains. The Tanya talks about the two animals, the two souls, the animal soul and the godly soul. But he's talking about even in neuroscience, in our brains, right? We want this and we want that. There are these different voices, different arguments. So who am I? Am I a person who loves cake, or a person who hates cake? Am I a person who gives in or a person who doesn't give in, right? Am I a cake lover or am I a cake denier, right? Well, it depends. It depends on what's going on. It depends on the circumstance. Is there a lot of pressure? Is everyone talking about the cake, how good it is, and everyone licking their fingers? Wow, you should really taste the cake. It's not so bad. It's worth the calories, right? Or people are kind of being very formal. Oh, the cake, it's not good to eat. It's not healthy, right? It's the circumstance. It's a situation that may tip the scale. And within the inner struggle for you to decide, am I going to give in? Am I going to put my hand out or hand up, right? So it's really about the circumstance. Sometimes we don't have that. We don't make that own decision. Well, we always do. We're always responsible for our decisions, but there's an external influence that could influence our decisions. So how does he apply this to Mel Gibson? Look at text 8b. Returning to Mel Gibson and his drunken tirade, we can ask whether there is such a thing as true colors. We have seen that behavior in the outcome of the battle among internal systems. To be clear, I'm not defending Gibson's despicable behavior, but I am saying that a team of rivals' brain can naturally harbor both racist and non-racist feelings. Alcohol is not a truth serum. Instead, it tends to tip the battle towards the short-term, unreflective faction, which has no more or less claim than any other faction to be a true one. Which means, obviously, most people don't have any feelings of hate or hostility to the Jewish people. Most people, either they're neutral or they like the Jewish people, right? Like you said in lesson one, there are less Jew haters than there were 50 years ago.
But more incidents.
But more incidents, right? More incidents. But the point is, those people who have it within them, for whatever reason, they have that bias, they have that hostility, they have that hatred towards Jewish people. Is it 100%? It's not 100%. It's 90%, it's 50%, it's 30%, right? Even Esau hated Jacob. It obviously wasn't 100% because at that moment, he had it within him to either generally or not to kiss and hug his brother and not kill him. So he obviously had something within him that was some measure of restraint or even love towards Jacob. The question is, what was the circumstance? What was he influenced by? If Jacob perhaps did not set the stage right, if he did not play his cards right, Esau could have came and killed him. But Jacob very wisely set the stage where he won over his emotions and he was able to bring that out within Esau. And the same is true with everyone else. Even those people who do tend to seemingly hate the Jewish people, but they're not 100% evil. They have other voices in their minds as well. And therefore, in the right circumstance, if we set the stage right, if we play the cards right, we can bring that out within them as well. So let's see how this is translated into the modern era. Pompidou comes to New York City. And what happens? There is mass demonstrations. I think Valley mentioned peaceful, who mentioned peaceful demonstrations? Peaceful demonstrations. Unfortunately, many peaceful demonstrations don't always remain peaceful. So for the most part, it was peaceful, but it seems like some of the entourage, some of the people who were with the president did get shoved around, and Pompidou was really upset. And Nixon had to come and apologize. Let's read text number 9. This is again from a New York Times article, March 3rd, 1970. President Nixon made a hurried trip to New York yesterday to apologize to President Pompidou, who was angered by what he termed insults to himself and his wife during a pro-Israeli demonstration touched off by his state visit to the United States. The French president has been angered by the jostling that members of his party received from demonstrators in Chicago, whose actions were marked by boos and angry cries, and by what he viewed an acceptance of such hostile acts by the Chicago police. That's what happens. Demonstrations. Now, everything comes from the Torah. Everything comes from the Torah. What's unique in modern era, which we did not have throughout the ages, was the third option of Jacob. The third option was to go to war. The Jews in Spain weren't able to go to war. Post Temple era in the Roman Emperor, the Jewish people were not able to go to war. And we don't only mean a physical war, we also mean a war of words, pressure, demonstrations, boycotts, social media. These are wars, a public outcry, something that we weren't able to do all this time. Today, we have that option. Freedom of speech. In most countries that Jewish people live in today, there is freedom of speech. You know the story where a Jew living in a communist Russia gets a knock on his door at 3 a.m. There's a KGB officer there he says, Moshe, Yeah, I'm all sleeping. Wake up! Did you apply for a visa to Israel? He says, yeah. You want to leave Russia? Why? Do you not have food over here? Yeah, I have food. I can't complain. Do you not have a job, a place to work? Yeah, I do have. I can't complain. Do you not have a house to live in? Yeah, I do have. I can't complain. So why do you want to go to Israel? Because in Israel, I can have all these things, but over there I could complain. So we live in a place that we do have freedom of speech, and maybe we should utilize it. So what does the Torah say? How should we utilize our freedom of speech? So when Pompidou came in the 1970s, obviously the American Jewish community was outraged with the sale of fighter jets to Libya. They had demonstrations, even peaceful demonstrations. The Rebbe of Lubavitch of Chabad at the time held a public gathering, and he spoke publicly about this incident. And we do know that the Rebbe was very well connected politically with many of the Israeli government, and he knew a lot of confidential information, what was going on behind closed doors, where some even Israeli officials, when they would speak to the Rebbe, they were surprised to hear things that he knows where even this Israeli official did not know, which is a side point. But the point is, he spoke publicly about this. I want to read this in text 10a and 10b. The public protest against the president of France angered French officials. This blocked any lobbying efforts that French Jews might have been able to make to prevent or at least reduce French assistance to Arab countries that are hostile to Israel. The stated reason for these protests was to demonstrate that America is a democratic country and that American Jews are not cowardly. This is a worthwhile objective when Jewish lives are not at risk. However, when Jews are threatened with the sale of many military jets to Libya, we have two options. We can organize public protests, or we can make every effort to either prevent or postpone the sale, reduce the number of jets sold, or to at least prevail upon the French to send less effective planes. Such aims can only be achieved through quiet diplomacy. The proof is that agreements of this nature have been reached in the past. The Rebbe does not specify what they were, but a year later, text 10b, the Rebbe does specify. So we see very clearly that it was not, maybe it felt good. And it felt, wow, we're Jewish people, we're not cowards, we're going to go out in the streets and we're going to demonstrate. But is it that effective? Does that, if you're goal-oriented, does that achieve anything? Other than Jewish people having a voice, which is perhaps a good thing, but does it achieve actual change for the cause that you are demonstrating for? Now, we're not saying that demonstration is never a good thing, but what we're saying is the general approach that the Torah teaches us: learn from Jacob, first gifts, then a war. War could mean demonstrations. War could mean a public outcry. War could mean boycotts. War could mean labeling people, or we'll get to labeling in a second. That's a war. Oftentimes, if we start with war, we don't achieve anything. If you want to actually have something to walk home with, and say, look, we made a difference. Sometimes it means gifts. It means quiet diplomacy. Speak to the right people, etc., etc. Text 10b. When Mr. Pompidou visited the United States, there were mass protests against him intended to intimidate France. This effort backfired. It can now be said that despite the French embargo against selling arms to belligerents in the Middle East, the French president had allowed the sale of small arms and light weapons to Israel. Items that can be sold without attracting publicity. Unbeknownst to the protesters, France all along during this embargo was also selling equipment to Israel. They were doing it under the table, and they were hoping that it would not attract, as it didn't attract any publicity. However, as a result of the demonstrations, the approval for such sales were withdrawn. So the demonstrations backfired. After some time, when he was no longer being disparaged, he assumed dealing with Jews behind closed doors and reinstituted the small arms sales. He also arranged for 300 Jews to be able to leave Egypt. All of this was accomplished without demonstrations and without publicity. The Jewish media was warned against disclosing any of this, and we only know of this from the non-Jewish press. The conclusion we must draw from this case is that we do not influence anti-Semites by constantly yelling at them, "You are an anti-Semite, you are a thief, you are a murderer." Rather, engage them in diplomatic conversations. Interesting line over here. Although such individuals are well aware of what we think about them, they are nevertheless human beings and wish to behave like human beings. Even if they know what the Jewish community thinks of them. And we can think of certain names that come to our mind, politicians, academics, journalists, that we're thinking they are so hostile to the Jewish people. I wish I could just go on social media and just name them anti-Semite, name them a murderer. Oh, this is your fault, right? What's going to become of it? What is it going to accomplish? It may feel good. I'm standing up for my rights. I'm not a coward. Jewish people in America are strong, we're influential. But what is it going to change in this person's mind, or this person who is in a power, or is in a position of influence? Are they going to change? Or if we have quiet diplomacy, that may go a lot further. There was a North Carolinian Senator, Jesse Helms. No, not North Carolina. I believe North Carolina. He was elected a senator in 1972. And for almost 15 years, he was seen as the hater of Israel. Every time he voted, he always voted against Israel. In 1982, after Israel invaded Lebanon, he suggested that the United States break off relations with Israel. Many pro-Israel groups were angered by Helms and tried to unseat him. He was seen as the biggest threat in the Senate to Israel. No foreign aid to Israel, everything, always voting against Israel's interests. In 1984,
Seems a big. Yeah.
Just a little.
Yes.
now we're not going, 1984.
He had a very colored history.
Okay. Now we're focusing on his relationship with the Jewish community in Israel. So in 1984, there was a celebration in the White House to celebrate the Rebbe's birthday. And it was also announced by President Reagan at the time as Education Day. The Rebbe really spoke a lot about the idea of education is not just about it's not just about knowledge and information, but it's really about character building. And because of that, President Reagan decided that he's going to announce and designate the day of his birthday as Education Day in America. So there was a celebration, and many high-profile dignitaries came to the celebration, many senators, congresspeople, people from the White House, and including Mr. Jesse Helms. He was there. After this celebration, a lawyer by the name of Alan Dershowitz was very upset. He was bothered. How could Chabad honor Jesse Helms? So he wrote a letter to the Rebbe, writing that, how could Chabad have such a Jew hater and someone who is so against Israel be at, honor them at the celebration? The Rebbe responded with a long letter, first saying, listen, we didn't honor him, he honored us. That's beside the point. But he said like this, text 11, he talks about how, and it's an important lesson of how we deal with people in power who seem to be against us. Text 11, I trust you will agree that in regard to persons of influence, whether in Washington or elsewhere, the first objective should be to persuade and encourage such a person to use his influence in a positive way in behalf of any and all good causes which are important to us. We should welcome every public appearance which lends public support to the cause, especially when there is a likelihood that it may be the forerunner of similar pronouncements in the future. My experience with such people, though I have never personally met the said person, has convinced me that politicians are generally motivated more by expediency than by conviction. In other words, their public pronouncements on various issues do not stem from categorical principles or religious imperatives. Hence, most of them, if not all, are subject to change in their position depending on time, place, and other factors. I believe, therefore, that the proper approach to such persons by Jewish leaders should not be rigid as a rule. It does no good to engage in a cold war, which may often turn into a hot war, nor does it serve any useful purpose to brand one as an enemy or as an anti-Semite, however tempting it is to do so, even if that person vehemently denies it. It can only be counterproductive. On the contrary, ways and means should be found to persuade such a person to take a favorable stance, at least publicly. It's an important word, right? Even if Esau did not generally kiss, but at least publicly they're taking that position. It's also important. We haven't too many friends, and attaching labels, etc., will not gain us any. Instances abound where the approach advocated above produced good results. There is surely no need to point out to you that responsible Jewish leaders consistently cultivated good public relations, indeed even cordial relations with President Carter and his predecessors, going back to President Roosevelt, regardless of their sometimes openly negative feelings towards Jews and Jewish causes. At the end of the day, when we label someone, you are a Jew hater, you are a bad person, you're an anti-Semite. What happens a year later, 2 years later? Now we need them. They're on a certain board, a committee in Congress, and we need their vote. How likely is it that they will vote in favor for the Jewish people when the Jewish community burnt the bridges with them? So it's just not smart. When you label a person, you're defining the person to themselves as well. How often are some young people in influence? It could be in politics, it could be in academia, it could be in a young journalist. They don't know much. They write something that seems to be unfavorable for the Jewish people, and right away we label them, oh, this is an anti-Semite. That itself makes them an anti-Semite. They say, okay, this is who I am, okay, I'll go with it. Sounds cool. And then later, they just continue on that trend because we fixed that box for them. We created that limitation that now they have to live up to their thing. So we have to be important not to label people. That's what the Rebbe was saying. There are people of influence. We have to influence them. Create that circumstance that we're going to choose, that they are going to choose these voices in their head and not the other voices in their head, right? Yeah, they may have negative voices in their head against the Jewish people, but if we set the stage right, they will be influenced and do it well. Jesse Helms ended up being one of the greatest supporters of Israel. He actually made a total change. He later was on the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate, and he was suddenly a total change, and he was always advocating and voting for Israel time and again. He ended up being a very, very good ally and friend for Israel. There was a situation here, and I don't want to mention names, so it's a good thing that I forgot the name. But this is about maybe 10 years ago, soon after I moved here. Someone in the community was telling us that there was a certain scholarship on a local level. I'm not sure if it was a parish. I think it was like a parish scholarship that only a handful of people were going to like win. It was like a lottery or something. I don't remember the details. And basically, someone in our community, Jewish guy, does not have a Jewish name, doesn't look very Jewish, if that means anything. And his daughter won this gift, this scholarship. So I'm not sure who it was, whether it was a council person or was an actual parish president or someone who was actually up for re-election. This person came personally to deliver this gift or this certificate to this family. He opens the door and he said, oh, they're talking, and he whispers and says something, I'm so glad you got it and not a Jewish person. He froze for a moment and he says, by the way, you know that I'm Jewish. His mouth dropped, he blushed, and he started apologizing. I didn't mean anything, right? Apologized. So he came to us, he came to Rabbi Nemes, told us the story, and said, what do we do about it? Like, should I make a whole big thing out of this? You know, he's up for re-election, he has his campaign. You know, what do we do about this? I don't know exactly what Rabbi Nemes told him, but I know that what he told him is not to make a big shtick out of it, not to label this person as an anti-Semite, because chances was he seemed to be the front runner, and I think he actually did win. If he's going to win, we need to have a good relationship with the Jewish community. So labeling him, even if he really, this is what's going on in his head, but just having that outcry, the public announcement, it's probably going to hurt the Jewish community, not benefit the Jewish community. Don't label a person. Now, what do we do? And again, every situation is different. It's not a blanket rule for every situation. Every person is different. Sometimes we try to do it clandestinely, do it quietly, secrecy. Sometimes we have to go public. But even when we go public, what's most important is not to label the person. You can label the actions. This thing that was written, this policy, this bill is not favorable for the Jewish people. This is anti-Semitic. Not that the person voting for it is an anti-Semite. Because once we label the person, now already they're on the other side. They are officially on the other team. They are against us, and we're not going to have any benefit from it. Now, I'm not saying there's no exception to the rule, but this is the general approach that seems to be what the Torah is telling us from Jacob and from throughout the generations. The same thing, by the way, works vice versa. The Philo-Semite, the people who seemingly are the lovers of Israel, they can also change, right? One day they're voting for Israel, the next day they're against. So we always have to set the stage. We always have to put that, circumstance to them, in front of them, that they should want to, for whatever reason, for a political reason or for other reasons, that they should want to act favorably for the Jewish people. Now, even more importantly is the idea of education. Because when we educate others, not just information, but character building, we should be helping others, thinking about others, sensitive to others. That helps even those who have hate in them, but that hate should not be expressed, and the love in them, like we said earlier, everyone wants to, any human being wants to act like a human being. We all want to act in a loving manner. But if we have that proper education where we are educated to always express our sensitivity to others, that will also help down the line when we are in positions of influence to act on that. I want to show a video. Exactly. Thank you. Which brings out this point. Commercial break.
Negative thoughts, actions, and speech create negative energy. Conversely, positive thoughts, actions, and speech create positive energy. And that's what led, with an idea that has its genesis in South Africa, to the idea of ARK, acts of random kindness. You see, this is kind of shaped a little bit, more or less, if you use your imagination, like Noah's Ark. And the idea is, you take some change, you place it in here, and when it's filled up, we pass it along to someone who's less fortunate. It isn't just the money collected, it's the thought and the feeling that it represents.
I went to a public school. I studied math and physics, and we studied how to solve math problems. I didn't know how to solve my own problems.
Rabbi David Aaron, a Jerusalem-based educator, reflects on his personal experience.
The real problems of life is what education should be focusing on. It's essentially about building people, and only great people will do great things.
It is my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome the 40th President of the United States, Ronald Wilson Reagan. Mr. President.
On March 30th, 1981, then President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, delivered a luncheon address at the Washington Hilton.
Thank you very much.
He left the hotel at 2:27 p.m., but as he headed to his limousine, a would-be assassin opened fire. Reagan was critically wounded, and the nation collectively gasped in horror. The president survived, and at a public gathering 2 weeks later, the Lubavitcher Rebbe insisted that the instructive lesson of the assassination attempt must similarly survive. The Rebbe saw the event as a wake-up call for the nation to upgrade its approach to education.
Dort der Chok HaMedina darf gehen in ein Beis Sefer. In der Beis Sefer meyusod und durchgenommen. Was darf geben ein Beis Sefer, darf geben Jidis. Nicht darf ausformen, aufmachen, dem Jeser Leib Hodom, als soll sein mit Midis Tevis. Und soll wissen, als stark, als geht und lernt in dem Beis Sefer. Aber der Riker lernen seiner ist, was zum Ton Teva sich. Und das ist der Teva Amiti für sich. Und das ist im Ganzen nicht rein in der Technik und in der Programm von Beis Sefer.
As much as we want to graduate mathematicians and scientists, we also want to graduate decent human beings.
Dr. Rona Novick, Dean of the Israeli Graduate School of Jewish Education and Administration, has given ample thought to this problem.
Very few educators would invite a charismatic speaker or have a big assembly program to create readers. They would understand that the way that we build reading skills is piece by piece and building block by building block. We start in kindergarten and first grade and we keep building on it. Well, we need to look at character education and social emotional learning in exactly the same way.
Judaism teaches us that it's important to give charity every day. And the more you give charity, that muscle of kindness within you gets stronger and stronger.
Rabbi Levi Greenberg and his wife Shana are emissaries of the Lubavitcher Rebbe in El Paso, Texas.
We embarked on a campaign to bring this message of daily giving to every single child in El Paso. And so we brought to El Paso the Ark Campaign. All the children in the school received one of these boxes, and they were told that the purpose of this box is to be taken home and filled every day. If they have extra coins, they should ask their parents for some money. After a month of collecting money, their class would nominate charities that should receive their combined money. And the winning charity would receive the combined monies that they had collected throughout that month. The ARC project, giving money every day, takes acts of random kindness and turns them into acts of routine kindness.
Raising a generation of individuals empowered with a sense of purpose and trained to pursue acts of kindness is an important factor in curing and preventing numerous social ills, including the reduction of hate and bigotry, along with anti-Semitism.
The more we give, the more we respect. We respect human life, we respect property, the more dignity we have for ourselves and for society. If we want to stop anti-Semitism, we have to stop hatred. And we have the opportunity to nip hatred in the bud by increasing in acts of goodness and kindness and inspiring and encouraging all of humanity to do so. Every single person should give charity every day, and hatred will be a thing of the past.
The call of the hour, more necessary than ever, is for each of us to adopt a charity box for regular, daily contributions, and to encourage all around us, family and friend, Jew and non-Jew, to act similarly actively demonstrate, encourage, and promote kindness, sympathy, and altruistic care. If a little illumination eliminates a lot of darkness, think of what a rapidly swelling force of systematic goodness can achieve for our communities, and ultimately for humanity. It's time to turn up the light.
Okay, so obviously important education, thinking about others, being sensitive to others, being giving, always exercise that muscle of giving, and through that, even those who have that hatred within them, it won't be expressed. So to conclude tonight's discussion, and to conclude the course, this is a 4-week discussion. So if you look on page 139, you have some of the course takeaways, some of the ideas that we've discussed over the 4 lessons. So for example, we will remain calm, not to have anxiety or fear, because God is with us. We will trust in God and upgrade our connection with Him, because ultimately that is the source of our blessing. We will create natural means through which God can provide our security, because that is the way it's manifest. God's blessing is manifest. We will not internalize anti-Semitism by altering our Jewish heritage, because it's not about us, right? We will be open about our Jewish identity, benefiting Jews and fostering diversity. We will share awareness of God's mission for all humanity and thereby help individuals avoid experiencing an inner void. We spoke about the ditch and the mound, where some haters are because they feel an inner void, and therefore we have to help them fill that void. We will thank God for the divine gift of the Holy Land and seek to strengthen its security and prosperity, because we understand that although there are many rationales to the Jewish people's right to Israel, but ultimately we have an intrinsic, essential connection to the land because it's God-given. We will avoid labels and public shaming. Instead, we will work with whomever we can to ensure beneficial results for the Jewish people. I want to end with one last thing, and then we'll do the last concluding video. We spoke a lot about hatred from outside of the community to the community. Another very important thing, and we'll conclude the course, is the unity of the Jewish people themselves. It's extremely important and necessary for the Jewish people to be in unity, get along with each other. You know, there's a famous story, the joke, where the guy ends up on an island. There's one Jew on the island. You know the story? He's taking him around. There are 2 synagogues. He says, there's one Jew on the island. Why do you need 2 synagogues? He says, you don't know. This is the synagogue that I have membership. This is where I pray. And that's the synagogue that I'll never step foot in. So we have this thing that we have the community is splintered. Happens to be that there are many communities like New Orleans, at least I guess I can call myself an outsider. I'm here for 10 years, where I feel that even the different communities get along and work together, coordinate with each other. But at the same time, even within our communities and our families, Jewish people have to be in unison. We learned this from the story of Purim. Haman tells Achashverosh, there's a nation that is spread out amongst all the other people, and to explain that not just literally, physically, that they are spread out, but they are spread out within their community. They're splintered. They don't get along with each other. Every individual is an individual. They're not part of a community. This person doesn't talk to that person doesn't talk to that person. It's not good. And that is almost like a spiritual cause for this decree of annihilation. What did Esther tell Mordechai? Go out there and gather the Jewish people. It means, go physically gather them in prayer, but it also means gather them emotionally, psychologically. They should all be together. They should feel like one. They should be like one nation. And that helps for a one unified response. When people are getting along, when communities are getting along, we respond, and we're able to achieve so much more when we get along together. But it's also a spiritual blessing as well. We say in our prayers, Baruchenu Avinu, let our Father, let God bless us. Kulanu ke'echad, we're all as one. When we're all as one, there's an extra added blessing from God. So ultimately, the blessing for our security is from God. So when we are all in unity together, it gives us the extra blessing. If we all be in unity, get all the blessings that we need. The ultimate blessing is that there should be no more haters, and that will be in the Messianic era. May it be speedily in our days. That's the conclusion of this course. Thank you all for joining. Just a quick announcement of some of the courses, the classes that are upcoming. This Thursday morning, we're starting a new weekly series, a weekly class, a short 30-minute class, primarily virtual, from 9 to 9:30 on the Siddur. If you would like to join in person, you're welcome to join in person. We'll do a 30-minute class starting from the beginning of the prayer book and kind of going through it. So there'll be maybe over a few months, a weekly Thursday morning class. You can PM me you can ask me for more information, for the Zoom information, if you'd like to join us. The next JLI, we're going to have a standalone class in January about melodies, a very interesting event or evening. We don't have an exact date for it, but look out for the email. And the next actual course, meditations, will start, I believe it's January 25th, but it's the exact date. That's the last week, I believe, of January. We will begin then. Thank you all for joining. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Stephen. We appreciate it, and I'm happy you were able to join on Zoom.